Several elements that were almost entirely presentational in nature have had their definitions redefined to add a little bit of additional semantic value to them. The small tag is one of those. Now, I want to take a look in the specification to learn a little bit more about it. In HTML4, the small element was simply defined as text that the browser should render in a small font without giving it any additional information or meaning. Now, in HTML5, this element has been redefined to represent legal text or other text that would normally be considered fine print. So notice in the definition here, it says that the small element represents side comments such as small prints. Now, I have a couple of notes below this. I'm going to scroll down a little bit so we can read these. And it says small print typically features disclaimers, caveats, legal restrictions, or copyrights. Small print is also sometimes used for attribution or for satisfying licensing requirements. Now, also notice the note below that the small element does not de-emphasize or lower the importance of text, emphasized by the M element or marked as important by the strong element. So all this is really doing is identifying the element as being fine print or a disclaimer. Now, that's a big change, however, because now it represents a specific type of content and not the size or importance of it. There's one more thing in the description that I want to make sure gets passed along, and that is that the small element should not be used for extended spans of text. You'll notice that just below the second note there. So no multiple paragraphs, no lists, no really complex structures inside of it. It's just supposed to be used for shorter runs of text where you have that one specific legal statement or a link to something of that nature. So if we go back to our Trails page, this time in the 03_08 directory, and scroll down as I have here to the page footer, you'll find a line of text that fits perfectly for what the small element can do for us semantically. You'll notice that about line 143 or so, there's a paragraph that says, all content copyright 2014 Cycle Tracks. Please read our terms of use. So this is perfect. I'm going to go ahead and highlight everything inside this paragraph, and then I'm going to go ahead and wrap that in a small element. Now, because of the way that I've written our CSS, if I save this and then go preview that in a browser, let me go ahead and refresh the page. You can see that it does appear a little smaller and it italicizes it, but that's just me writing the CSS. What I want to show you is what happens to a browser's default styling when you use small. So I'm going to go up in Firefox here. I'm going to turn off my page styling and scroll down, and you can see that kind of by default, what browsers do to any text inside of a small element is they do render it a tad bit smaller. And that really goes back to these earlier versions of HTML who basically instructed the browsers that, hey, this should be, size smaller, if you will. So there is still that sort of residual presentational use inside the browsers. And if you don't want that via the use of your CSS, you'll need to overwrite that. So if you do decide to use the small, I'm going to turn all my styles back on again. If you do decide to use the small element, be aware that you're probably going to have to overwrite some of the default browser styling. Also, keep in mind that if you're going to use it, the small element is for smaller segments of text, not longer passages, and also remember the restrictions on which type of content can go inside of it. Make sure you're using it with legal disclaimers, copyright data, anything that would normally be considered fine print. Thanks to its redefinition in HTML5, the small element becomes yet another element that can help us add meaning to our code.